You're listening to Soberoso, a show dedicated to alcoholics, addicts, survivors of abuse, overcomers of great tragedies, and those of us with mental health issues too. Each week, we invite guests and listeners from around the world to listen in as we have casual conversations with regular people like you and me who've, against all odds, turned their lives around. If you're a family member of someone suffering from alcoholism or addiction, a newcomer or old-timer, or sober curious, this show is for you. Join us now on the Soberoso Podcast with your host, Dora Gosselin, in sharing our passion for recovery.
Hello, beautiful peeps, and welcome back to another episode of Soberoso, the podcast. If this is your first time finding us, we welcome you with open arms. And if you are a repeat listener, thank you for your continued love and support. My name is Dora, and I am your grateful host of this show. I am also a recovering alcoholic, addict, and codependent no more. In 2018, I walked away from a 30-year career of drinking and drugging at the age of 44. And I am here to normalize conversations around alcoholism, addiction, and mental health issues. I do this by sharing my personal recovery story and interviewing many others who are doing the same. Our guests include people of all different ages and backgrounds from around the world who share their true life experiences before and after getting clean and sober. We are recovering out loud to end the suffering in silence for those who have not yet found their way or their voice. So please join us here every week in sharing our passion for recovery and stay oh so sober with Soberoso.
Warning. This podcast deals with mature subject matter that may not be suitable for all listeners. It may contain talk of sex, drugs, alcohol, abuse, and have the occasional profanity. Our stories may also be triggering to some. We share our experiences openly to demonstrate that it is never too late to change. And we do recover.
Today we are going to revisit with one of our very first guests when we started this podcast over a year ago. He has become a very good friend of mine since then, and I'm proud and honored to call him a friend. His name is Bill W., and he lives in Calgary, Alberta. Bill and I are both advocating and speaking up about alcoholism, addiction, and recovery. So I am looking forward to catching up with him today as we continue to celebrate our 1-year anniversary of the Soberoso Podcast. Please join us now as we take a trip to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and visit with my friend Bill. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Dora. How's it going?
Fantastic. How about yourself, my friend?
Oh, it's going pretty good. It couldn't be much better. Congratulations on your 1 year of Soberoso podcasting. That's friggin' amazing. And for me, life's pretty good. Just cruising along, kind of doing a lot of similar things as you, which is why we've become such good friends. And, you know, just really excited about today and about the future of my life and and whoever is in my path.
Fantastic, Bill. Well, I'm so glad to be catching up with you here on the show. And for any of our guests that might be tuning in for the first time here today, if you would like to hear Bill's incredible story and journey in recovery, you can back up to our episode a year ago with him titled
A Straight Up No Bullshit Chat with Bill W.
That's it. So yes, if you are tuning in right now and you have not heard Bill's story, you're going to have to back up to a year ago with Bill's interview where he tells us all about his past and how his journey in recovery began. That episode is called A Straight Up No BS Chat with Bill W. So Bill, since we had you on the show a year ago, I know a lot of things have changed for you in your life. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been going on in your life, a little bit about your podcast, and just where you're at today?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, when we first chatted, I had been on Instagram for a very short time. I was already pretty active within the platform, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I had worked with others for quite some time. For years and years, I'd been working one-on-one with others and quite an influential member of recovery up here in Canada, in Calgary. And so I was taking it out. I was trying to be, like, as you like to say, recovering out loud. And so one of my sponsees and myself started our own podcast called the UDR Cast. And that went really well. It's just been rebranded, and now I'm just the host by myself, and it's leveled up a notch into a lot more professional, just like yours. Yours is really professional. I really love what you do. What else has changed? I've got a YouTube channel, and I'm really trying to influence the First Nations communities up here in Canada. They're very, very sick up here. There's a lot of bad things happening within our First Nations communities. And I think I mentioned that last year when I had the conception, but it's come a long way since then. I will be doing a First Nations influencer podcast here pretty soon. And I want to do some visits to some communities and maybe do some short documentaries and just kind of all over the place. Things are really good, and the path just opens up, and my own life has changed a lot. I've gone through a lot of growing in this last year. Part of that growing is, I've been part of a Sundance within my culture, which is, going inside yourself and trying to, do the inner work that we need to do along the way. And yeah, I don't know, Dora, things are just really good, and I'm excited about the future. And my kids are great. Our relationship is strong. Anyone in my life, the relationships are really strong. So that's a real positive, and they just keep getting stronger and stronger.
We are not affiliated, nor do we represent AANA or any of the anonymous programs in any way, shape, or form. However, some of our discussions and guest stories may contain references to these organizations. At Soberoso, we celebrate all paths to sobriety.
Fantastic, Bill. And, when you and I first talked a year ago, I was attracted to your message because I was just getting on Instagram myself and just kicking off the Soberoso podcast. And I think I saw a couple videos that you had put out, and I was like, wow, this guy, I want to know more about him, which is why I've reached out to you. And I just love that you are in a position and you are able to be working with the First Nations. I mean, aside from being such a positive inspiration and advocate for alcoholism and addiction and recovery, the fact that you also have this in and position to work with the Indigenous community is just, you are primely positioned to do incredible things in so many different ways. So yeah, I can see why you've got a lot on the go. You've got a big message to share and a couple different directions you can be taking that message. So I'm really thrilled to see where you go with this.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I didn't realize until recovery, we do this introspection work. We look at our lives and the patterns, and it's been revealed through a lot of the work that I ran away from trying to be First Nation. I'm half Korean, half white, and as I've done this uncovering and discovering, part of the recovering is I need to help my people, because I know there's so many people just like me that disconnected from their identity of who they are as First Nations people. And I ran from it for years. And once I understood and realized a lot of these deep inner woundings, I'm like, man, there's got to be a lot of our people doing this and suffering and picking up the bottle or the drug to try to escape. And I started doing some research, and I'm like, wow, this field is wide open, and our people need that help. And I didn't even really know what I was going to do, but it's just revealing itself as I go. And, I got a few videos up on YouTube just in that respect for the First Nations, and I got some more coming up, and trying to build a program or two that might be able to help our brothers and sisters in the Indigenous community. And I am well positioned, right? And to me, Dora, it's always been. I didn't understand this at first when I came into recovery, but the spiritual malady, the spiritual sickness, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, doesn't matter. That's why we pick up the drink and the drug, right? And, within our First Nations community, there's a lot of addictions. There's a lot of suicides. There's a lot of domestic violence. There's a lot of discontentment there. And I believe it starts with one person, right? You help one person, just like me as the example. You can help one family, and that family can help the community. And like even today, like my two youngest daughters are working the steps, because the power of attraction in my life, the building of character, and whatever it is that I transmit out there into the world, they want some of that, right? And they came to me and asked me if they could work the steps to be better people. And my ex-wife even asked me if she could work the steps. My daughter's boyfriend asked me if they could work the steps. And I wouldn't say any of them are full-blown addicts or alcoholics. Of course, they have their own issues with maybe a little overuse, but they see the design for living aspect, right? And so they're all working the steps, and that's the miracle of recovery. As you build character and change, and you live vulnerably and truthfully, that's all people really want, and we become the beacons, and that's why I love you, right? Because you are the beacon. You have done a lot of this work, and you have medicated your own spiritual malady with your own higher power and your own vision of helping others. And so it's just a beautiful thing.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for your beautiful compliments and comments. I appreciate you so much, and I just wanted to touch a little bit on the healed relationships in recovery. You've mentioned that a couple times, and also this idea of your daughters and your ex-wife working the steps now. I mean, that is just such a beautiful thing. And it reminds me of, when I first started this Soberoso podcast, Bill, you were my third guest on the show, and I really didn't know where this podcast was going to take me. I didn't know if I was going to be able to stay committed to it. I didn't know if I was going to be able to continually talk about recovery without getting, stale or stagnant. And here we are, a year later. I didn't miss one episode, and I've stayed consistently committed to it. But on that episode that you were on the show with me, I had let my family know about the podcast because I was excited about it. This was a whole new adventure for me. And the girls, my daughters, listened to a couple of the episodes. And then when you and I were recording, we both started talking about smoking crack. And at that time, that was not something that I talked about quite openly. And you and I, in that interview, both discussed this. And we also discussed how there was so much shame attached to this specific drug. And I remember when we were in that recording, I thought, oh my goodness, if my daughters hear this one, it's going to come as a surprise to them. Like, oh my goodness, what are they going to think? And I have to thank you, because after that episode, both my daughters called me separately, and I spent an hour on the phone with each of them, and they had no idea where my level of addiction had taken me. They both had said something along the lines that, Mom, I knew you drank and maybe you smoked weed, but I didn't know like crack. So, talking about this with you, Bill, it led to conversations that I would have never had willingly, or why would I just bring that up with my daughters, right? So it opened the door, and it really opened the communication level for me with my own daughters, where they can ask me anything and I will tell them the answer. And it's educating them, because they are normal. My youngest takes a sip of a margarita and feels funny and doesn't have another sip, which is nuts for an alcoholic brain like me. It's like, well, yeah, I feel funny, I want more, I want to feel more funny. But it's opened these doors of communication that I wouldn't never have had if I didn't start this adventure in podcasting. And I have found that this podcasting has not only helped, I thought it would be a platform to share other people's stories, but in the last year, looking back, it has really helped me in my own journey to own my story and to be able to speak on this type of platform without that shame that I had attached to that word, even when you and I talked a year ago. So it has been an incredible journey. If you are enjoying the Soberoso podcast, we ask you to please hit that subscribe button or follow wherever you're listening.
I'd like to touch on, when you were describing the fear as we were speaking of, oh no, what am I saying? And we start guarding our words and we start guarding certain things. And luckily you didn't that day, right? You kind of went with the flow, but like that's kind of the illness saying like don't heal me. But then you did, and then the truth comes out. And my story is very similar to yours, as I've talked about it more and more and more on the podcasts, on the videos, and my kids ask me questions, and then I have to talk about it. What I've learned is, through the vulnerability and the actual truth, that's what speaks. It's like our open hearts, right? And then it opens up these dialogues for actual truth, and it builds the relationship with my kids, and I'm sure with yours, where they're able to tell you anything. And maybe someday down the road, because life gets their hands on our kids, right? And we don't really know what their journey is, but at least they know they can come and speak vulnerably to us. And the more that we voice this, we just heal like a little bit more, a little millimeter by a little millimeter by a little millimeter. And we give the validation to the others who are listening out there that it's okay to talk about this, because that guilt and that shame kind of just keep us hidden in that little box, and we die with guilt and shame. And then I just like to say, I had my daughters over about a week ago to do the UDR podcast, and we were so open and vulnerable. And they said things in that podcast that I hadn't heard before, that I didn't know. We talked about their upbringing, me as an untreated addict alcoholic, because I quit drinking at 22. And then I was a workaholic, which is just a manifestation of the spiritual malady. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of different things. And in some respects, my family had to walk on eggshells because I was a pretty pissed off human being. And so they talked about a lot of this stuff, right? And as we're speaking on the mics, my heart's just like opening up, and I'm feeling all these feelings, and I'm also feeling the healing. And they were just getting honest and vulnerable, and it was just another, like you said, another opportunity to heal and build our strength in our relationship. So, yeah, I don't know, Dora. I didn't know that starting these podcasts was going to do what it did. I just wanted to kind of get a message out there of hope, but it's just done so many more things for me that I couldn't have really seen. And it's built some beautiful connections. And we're not just talking like, here in Calgary, where a lot of my interviewees are from. I am now interviewing, like I interviewed you, I'm interviewing people in Florida, and the lead singer of the Casualties is coming on, and I'm building all these relationships, and it's because of Instagram, but it's because I burnt my life to the ground, essentially, right? And so there's so many more gifts that are coming that I couldn't have ever have seen coming, and if I just let it go, then good things happen. Once I start to force and control, then bad things happen. So
fantastic. Well, as you touched a little bit on it, I would like to backtrack and say for myself, starting this podcast a year ago, first of all, I had an idea of starting a podcast like my first week in recovery. I'm so glad that I didn't start it at that point, because boy, it would have been a totally different show, and I think I still would have had a lot of anger in my tone, and I would not have portrayed the correct message if I had started it. But I had this idea that, I want to start a podcast on recovery, and I didn't want to wait until I had 10 or 20 years of experience. I kind of wanted to start it young in my recovery to speak where I was coming from at that stage in recovery. And my original idea was, when I started getting clean and sober and going to 12-step meetings in Mexico, I also started exploring areas around me. And I loved to just go on a day trip and end up in a different beach town. And I would center that around an English-speaking meeting. And I would jump in my car and go for a 2-hour ride and be in a whole new beach town, and with the purpose of hitting an English-speaking meeting at this beach town in Paradise in Mexico. So my original idea was that I wanted to start this podcast, but I thought I would have to physically go out of town and, find somebody that shared a good story in a meeting, then maybe take them into a VW van where I had all this recording equipment set up and record a podcast with them. But what this pandemic did is that when the pandemic hit, everything kind of had to switch gears. So for the first time in my life, I never even heard of Zoom. So for the first time in my life, I'm going to look at virtual meetings, and it shifted into this podcast where it is today, where I am interviewing people around the world. And out of 66 episodes, I think I personally know 2 of those people. So the whole pandemic and this podcast for me has shifted in a way and in a good direction that I didn't know was possible. If the pandemic hadn't hit, Bill, I don't know that I would have reached out to you to be an interviewee. And I feel like now I have these connections and this binding through recovery to people around the world that I don't know in person. That is just incredible to see this reach in recovery across countries around the world. It's just, I just love this adventure.
yeah, I can relate 1,000,000%. Another thing that's been interesting, and we chatted about this before, another thing that I found really interesting is my recovery and the message that I carry. I'm working with the real deal alcoholics, the utterly hopeless ones that no matter how great the wish or the necessity, they have an utter inability to leave it alone. Pure powerless. And so my message over the years has gotten really strong based on the work that I've done with others and my knowledge of the literature and going to meetings. And then I come on to Instagram recovery community. And as I see these different levels of recovery, people want to live good lives. And not every single person that's on the Instagram recovery community is the hopeless, real deal alcoholic addict. A lot of them are heavy drinkers or heavy users or moderate drinkers, moderate users, but it's affected their life. And some of these people can stop or moderate, and they like the lifestyle. So I've really had to open my mind and taper down my strongness in the delivery of what my belief is. Because if people just want to live a good life and they just want to put down the substance because they want a better life, that's great. And I gotta open my mind and go, okay, not everyone is like you. Some people are different, and there's a whole gamut of different people. And some people use fitness. Some people use, just meditation. Some people use yoga. So I've really had to open my mind. And then also in the recovery community, of course, I'm also about the spiritual malady. But there's a lot of people in the recovery community recovering from like systematic abuses, domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, eating disorders, all of these different kinds of things. And it really opened my mind even more. I do believe that a lot of these other issues stem from the spiritual malady regardless, but their viewpoint is different, and they have a right to recover out loud as well. So that's been really interesting. And I know that you've really taken that approach in your podcasting where it doesn't matter what you're really recovering from. Let's hear what your story is and how you've recovered, because there's somebody else can hear that story and relate to it anywhere around the world, because we're all very similar in these respects. And so you've helped me open my mind a little bit. A lot of my podcasting when I started was based in the steps, but now I've expanded it, and it's very similar to what you're doing. I don't think I'm quite at the expansion and the openness of what you're doing quite yet, but I'm open more. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, Bill. Well, at Soberoso with our podcast, we do celebrate all types of recovery and, all different paths to get there. And I myself am based in a 12-step, a couple different 12-step programs, and that's my chosen way and my way that I got clean and sober. But I guess for me, when I started out this podcast, because I was so young in recovery, like when I started the podcast, I only had a year and a half of recovery time. So for me, I didn't have a lot of experience or a lot of time under my belt to be well versed in the big book or the literature. So I guess when I started the podcast, because of my my youth in recovery, can I say that? My recovery youth? Because I'm relatively still a newcomer, let's put it that way. I had to be more flexible with the guests that I would have on my show. So, it's been really interesting because a lot of the guests that I do end up having on the show, they are educating me. And I love that, my mind is open and willing to hear other people's stories and how they got to recovery. And a lot of them, when I started the podcast out, I used to have kind of a script of questions that I would go through. And, the podcast and me have both grown over the last year. Now I prefer to just go into a podcast. I do know a little bit of background on the people that I'm interviewing, like when their soberversary is, and if they're okay to talk about anything. That's the main two questions I have. But other than that, I really enjoy going into an episode, recording with somebody and learning in that moment, like really getting to know them. And I get schooled. I get educated all the time, and I love it. And I have learned that, like you were saying, Bill, about, some people not being the real deal alcoholic or addict like ourselves. Everybody comes from a different a different path, and some people do just want a better life. And I have realized through my guests in the last year, some women, they, were absolute party animals, and after having a couple kids, they realized they had to get sober for their kids. And some people just get sick and tired, and one day they wake up and they think, they make a decision and something has to change. So not everybody gets clean and sober the same way that you and I found our way and our path. And that's okay. The main point is that they came to a point in a time in their lives where something had to change and they made that decision. And we celebrate that no matter what path that might be.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing. Like, as we're working in active addiction, we almost separate ourselves from so many different aspects of other people, so much judgment and so much maybe even contempt for a lot of different groups of people. And as we do this uncovering and discovering process through the introspection work, it just opens our minds and allows us to see the truth. Like, everyone's just trying. Everyone's a human being. I don't need to separate me from you, because you actually are me. And once I start building that compassion, like that, I didn't know what that was part of recovery, but building that compassion and understanding other people at different levels has just been, it's fundamentally changed me on the inside as a human being. Like, when I first came to recovery, I just wanted to get my career back, and then get on with the business of being self-satisfied. That was kind of my goal. 2 years in, my career was back in. I was making six figures again. I was director of operations for a corporation. I didn't have my own company yet, but it was going that way. And then I realized one day, because I'd worked with so many addicts and alcoholics, people with the spiritual malady, I'd opened my heart, I'd built so much compassion. One day I sat at my desk and I'm like, I don't want to fucking do this anymore. I don't want to work for the man and just work for me and make me happy. And I couldn't. Something in me was saying, help your fellow man. So on a prayer to my grandmother, who was my higher power, it was like, okay, Billy, you don't need to worry about the money. The money and everything will be taken care of. You just go help God's kids. And then I changed everything. And that whole trajectory, and I didn't even know what I was doing, kind of like you at the start. I don't know what I'm doing. And today, 3 years down this path, I still don't know what I'm doing. I wake up every day and I ask Creator to give me the direction, give me the clarity, show me where to go, who to help, how to do it. And He keeps providing me with the funds to move forward, to pay my rent, to eat, and the people that I meet along the way that help push me or pull me along, and you're one of them, right? I call you a lot in regards to the technology you use for podcasting, what's worked, what hasn't. And not only that, we have a lot of discussions about life and how it's going, and how's your job at the center treating you, and how's this, and you ask me the same, and relationship gets built out of darkness. So yeah, it's just a beautiful thing. And I when you don't have words to explain the feelings, that that's beyond your control. And I don't have words to explain exactly what I'm feeling or trying to relay. And I know that's because you can't explain God. You can't explain, that Creator, that when you work for Him, He just does these things that.
Oh, Bill, I love that. I could talk to you for hours about recovery or about, strategies or where we're going next.
If you are serious about getting clean and sober, and you are ready to make big changes in your life, join us at Recovery in Paradise, where we are offering a 90-day inpatient program for men in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. We have a full English-speaking support staff ready to help you overcome your alcoholism and addictions. Start your recovery in the tropical destination of Puerto Vallarta with us. Visit our website for more info at www.recoveryandparadisepv.com.
And now, back to the Soberoso Podcast with your host, Dora Gosselin.
It's just been a wild and incredible journey this last year, and recovery in general. But being able to find these platforms and get a message out there into the world. And for me, I know for me, when I got sober and I started going into these meetings, I loved hearing people's stories. In the beginning, like, I never went to any treatment centers. I never went to detox. I never went to anything like that. Like, I got sober walking into a 12-step meeting, and that is how my recovery journey started. And for me, that happened in Mexico. And we have periods here that we have like very high seasons and low seasons. So when I started my recovery, sometimes there was only 6 people in a meeting or 8 people in a meeting. And that was the scale and the size of the meetings when I started my journey. So when people shared their stories, it wasn't that often. And I really enjoyed hearing people's stories, because in the beginning, that's how I knew I was in the right place. Because when people would share their stories, I would relate with them. And all of a sudden, all these things I had shame about, like I was having blackouts for years that I never talked about, just in my own head. I was trying to correct my drinking and the mixture that would make me not black out, by adding a little of this drugs with that drinking, and, like just chaos, trying to control it. So when I came into these 12-step meetings and I would hear people's stories, that's the first thing that got me like, wow, these people get me, I'm not alone. Because for the longest time, I thought what I was experiencing, I was alone. I didn't think there was other people like me. So their stories inspired me. And therefore, having this podcast, because I didn't get to hear stories often because it was such a small group here, I couldn't wait for other people's stories. So it is just a pleasure and such a beautiful thing for me to be able to talk to people around the world that share their stories. And you know what I have learned over the past year in podcasting is that, alcoholism and addiction affects every race. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter how much money you make or don't make. There are no boundaries. There are no limits. And there are also no limits on recovery. Any of us can recover if we want it bad enough.
And that's the key. If you want it bad enough. Like, I know in our literature, it talks about this we did because we honestly wanted to, and we were willing to make the effort. And I always say, you can want this shit and you can need it. But if you don't want it and do it, because there's a lot of action in recovery. Like the word recovery, just, it sounds like, you just don't drink or you don't do drugs and you just kind of stop. But you and I both know that if that was the case, we wouldn't be here talking. We couldn't stop. So through the action in recovery is what actually propels us into the next level, into the next level, into the next level, right? So anyone out there who is listening that wants recovery, it takes hard work. It takes like introspection. It takes looking at what and who you really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become somebody different and try to change, try to build character. What I've really noticed about this way of life is I've been driven, my whole life is driven on old ideas, emotions, and attitudes. Unless I am willing to look at these ideas, emotions, and attitudes and try to throw them aside and live with some principled moral values, which isn't easy because these old ways are so deeply ingrained. That's why you have to want it so bad, and that's why you have to do the action, because through the action, you change your thinking, and then you get this different perspective of looking at life, where life becomes very beautiful in many respects. Like Dora and I are here talking about how beautiful things are, how awesome things are. We weren't like this for a long time, but it took the commitment and the persistency to change our lives. And through the change, our perception has changed. And now, because you and I are, shining lights, how can you not want to give this to somebody else? How can you not want to inspire somebody else? Because we know how black it can be. We just want the light to shine in everybody. And
fantastic, Bill. I also wanted to back up a little bit, because you were mentioning earlier about not knowing what you're doing, or where this podcast, or where your YouTube, or where your work with First Nations is going to take you. And you know what? I am the same way, and I really feel like that is, well, in my case anyway, higher power led. Like I, for the first time, I don't have a regular paycheck. I don't have money to count on, but at the same time, I have so much peace. Those 9th step promises are coming through in my life. Like, I feel this podcasting journey that I am on is the right direction that I should be going, that has propelled me through the whole last year at a time in the pandemic when I was in isolation, a single woman at home, and having this podcast to work on. I'm not kidding, Bill. It saved my ass in this last year, to be holed up in the house, not seeing anyone, not social, not going to meetings in person. This podcasting has, kept me working in recovery and just fully immersed in recovery for the whole past year. And, there have been so many people that have OD'd and have gone back out during the pandemic after having years of recovery and have died, because isolation is not a good thing for an addict or an alcoholic. So this fucking podcast has saved my ass. And, I thank God every day when I wake up in the morning. Like, I thank God for this podcast. I thank God that I can be of service and be healing in my own way at the same time, giving a message. And I don't have all the answers, but I do feel that it is what I'm doing is following my higher power's will. And I'm not worried about how I'm going to make the rent. I just feel like I'm doing the right thing, and somehow it's coming together. So I'm just going to keep on keeping on.
I love that. And I do believe these things are led by the universe, by Creator, God, whatever you want to call it. When you're doing the right things in life for other people, one of my mentors, Jordan Peterson, talks about when life is going to kick your ass, and life will kick everyone's ass at some point. If you're doing something meaningful and purposeful, that is what will carry you through some of the worst tragedies of your life. And I agree with that 100%. And I have 6 years of recovery and 6.5 years. I've been through some shit, but the purpose of helping others has gotten me through anything. And I know that that's the same with you with this podcast, right? You're younger than me in recovery, but it pulled you along. And some days it was like work, other days it was like not work. And some of the gifts that open up, like as these stepping stones get placed in front of me in my path, just like you in your path. Yesterday, I had an interview with the lady who's the director of a college here in Calgary, and she found me on LinkedIn. And just because of my posts, because I always do a meme, but then I write like a couple paragraphs usually of something important or impactful that usually hits people. So over months and months and months of this, she got in touch with me and said, I want you to interview for being instructor on addictions at our college. And I'm just like, what? I don't even have grade 12 for fuck's sakes. And we had the best interview. She sent me a whole bunch of stuff and said, look at this and see where you'd best fit. And maybe we can even send students to you to do practicums. And I'm just like, whoa. And, 6 months ago, this guy I know in recovery, he's taken an addictions course at another college. And he comes to me and he's like, hey, dude, guess what? I was in class today and our teacher was playing your YouTube videos. And I'm like, are you serious? And like all these little things happen. And like there's a guy who builds programs for Indigenous history and addictions at another college. This is a different college. And him and I are going to exchange. He's going to take me through the program he built, and I'm going to take him through the big book. And this guy's like brilliant. And I like, these are just the things that happen that I don't have any control of. But just when you're packing into the stream of life, doors open and things happen. And I always got to discern it with meditation to see if that's the right path. But, Dora, like we both know, walking this way of life, there's no option now. Like it's not a fear of using drugs or alcohol anymore for me. It's give me some more of that God dope. Give me some more of that love. Give me some more of that beacon of light, because that's what's pulling me along now. And it has nothing to do with me being afraid to use drugs or alcohol, although I better keep a healthy fear of that. That's why I still go to meetings and work with others. So I do have a healthy fear of that, but that's not what motivates my recovery anymore. Can you relate to that?
Oh, 100%, Bill. I mean, when we first come into the program, it's just like, how do I stop drinking and how do I stop drugging? But quickly we realized that there's so much underneath that, I don't think about drinking or drugging now. And I can actually go out, I still love to dance. I still love, house music, and where I live, there are no sober options. So about every 3 months I get this, this itch that I need to go out and do some dancing. And I do. And I say a little prayer before I walk out of the house and say, God, let me be an example of what sobriety can look like. Be with me as I go out there tonight. And I have a smile on my face and dance my ass off. And when it's time to sit down, that's when I leave. I literally dance for hours, and when it's time to sit down, that's when I leave. And it's like, yeah, I'm not, I'm not thinking about drinking or drugging. Not at all. This journey is, it's an incredible thing. And one thing that I realized is like, Bill, I drank and drugged for 30 years. And when I started this journey, I was a daily drinker for the last 10 years. And when I started this journey in recovery, I'm not kidding you, within 3 months, the obsession to drink and drug was gone. After 30 years. How is that possible? 3 months and I was not thinking about drinking and drugging. But what I have been doing is learning about that mind, about those learned behaviors, about the habits, about the ego, about the trying to control and be the director of the show. There's so much more underneath of alcoholism and addiction. Those are just symptoms of underlying causes and conditions. And that's where the growth comes in. Learning what triggers me, learning how to rely and lean into my God and my higher power when things do get tough. But yeah, I do not think about drinking or drugging anymore. And it still just blows my mind that within 3 months, that obsession left the building after a 30-year habit. That just blows my mind.
Yeah. And, I know when I got here, I had to go to meetings for the first month, like 5 meetings a day. But I found once I started working the program and doing what you described there, looking at the patterns, looking at my resentments, looking at the things that actually were my ideas, emotions, and attitudes, that's why I'm picking up all the time. And once I started kind of looking at that and carrying some momentum forward, I'm going to say probably within 3 months also, my obsession to pick up crack or drugs or anything was lifted as well. There was times where I would think about it, but because I was building that relationship with my creator, the thought was fleeting and lost pretty quickly. And I would go to a meeting or I would do some type of action, like we keep talking about the action, right? So, yeah, and like I guess the central fact of my life today is the connection I've made with my higher power. That's the number one thing. I can't be the great father that I am today, the great friend, the great human being that I believe I am today. And I didn't always believe that, right? But I do believe that today because I attribute it to my relationship with God, higher power, whatever the fuck you want to call it. In our literature, it says these men believe in themselves and they believe more in the power that pulls these chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. And that's my experience. My self-confidence today is in direct relation with my relationship with my creator. And if I distance myself from that relationship, I start feeling worse because now I'm living in pride, not love. I'm living in comparison, not individuality. And my self-confidence starts being based on what you think of me. And if that's the case, then I'm fucking slipping down banana peel trail. But I'm aware now because I can see patterns of being sober. When I was first new, I couldn't see patterns of staying sober. But 6.5 years in, I see patterns of being sober. When I was new, I could only see patterns of, being a waster. So I'm with you, Dor.
Good stuff, Bill. Well, you know what? The patterns of being sober, after a 30-year drinking and drugging career on my side, so many times when I wake up in the morning, I thank God for another day sober. And I almost feel like it's too fucking good to be true. Like I almost think like I'm going to wake up and my sobriety was just a dream. Because how do you go from 30 years of drinking and drugging to living the life that I am living right now? Like I come from a heart of gratitude and grateful every fucking day because without this sobriety, I'd have nothing. And, I've said many times before that before I started my journey in recovery, I was at a point, I was high. I was like locked up in a room, like with, a crazy ex on the other side of the door. I was in a very toxic scenario. And I remember thinking I had absolutely no hope left in my life. And I had lost a lot of friendships. I had lost the contact with my family, and I just felt backed into a corner. And I remember being high as a kite thinking, I don't even have any fucking hope left. Like, if I don't have any hope, this is a dangerous place to be because I don't need a penny to have hope. I don't need money to have hope, but I have no hope to get out of this situation. So to be sitting here a year later, celebrating 1 year of podcasting, sharing other people's stories, to have friends like you in my life, Bill, to have hope again in my life, I've got goosebumps here. This sobriety journey is just a life I would never have imagined, and I don't want to change it for anything. I love my sober life, and I want to tell everybody about it. I want everybody to know how good life can be if you really want this.
That's it. If you want it, it can be great. And that's not to say that we don't go through life's trials and tribulations, but we can handle it. And we don't go down to the bottom of the scale. And a lot of that scale for us is guilt and shame and beating ourselves up, which creates more discontentment, which makes for we need relief. No, we don't do that anymore. We don't need to do that anymore. We know what's working, and we just keep working what's working, and it gets better and better. And like I said, I have no words for a lot of the ways my life is today. And of myself, by myself, that's not going to happen. It's going to happen when I trust the universe. It's going to happen when I reach out and help other people. It's going to happen when I get the fuck out of my own way. Because really, I'm my problem. And I really do believe, like our literature says, selfish self-centeredness, that we believe is the root of our trouble, driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. That's me. I'll step on the toes of my fellows and they'll retaliate, hurting me seemingly without provocation. But no, fuck. There's a lot of provocation there. But that's the inner work. That's the inner stuff where I get to see some of this. But yeah, like, I'm a different man. I'm a different person. And as I radiate this love and kindness, and I'm not always loving and kind, but I mostly am, you know, it ripples in this world, which is what's propelled me to be an influencer, which propelled me to want to help my First Nations people and people in recovery. And, you know, the guys that I'm interviewing on my podcast from all over, they're messaging me shit saying, bro, you're inspiring me. You saved my ass today before I went into the studio with your post or whatever, right? And I keep getting it. And I'm like, fuck, okay, these are the little carrots of God saying, okay, you're doing the right thing. Keep going that way. Because sometimes even today, like I still suffer from a disease of self or me. And a lot of it's negative self-talk. So I can think that, you know, negative things about what I'm doing. But I keep getting reaffirmed, and it slowly, millimeter by millimeter, it just keeps changing me and giving me more confidence and allowing me to be more and more of service. And, you know, I just, again, I can't thank you enough, Dora, for, you know, coming on our meetings, coming on the Big Book Study, sharing your experience, asking the questions that you've had, and doing what you've done. Because you actually inspire me. You're a huge reason I'm doing what I'm doing, because I'm kind of following in Dora's footsteps as a podcaster. Yeah, I'm carving my own path. But like I said, like, you know, you're way younger than me in recovery, but that doesn't matter. We're both doing the work for our Creator, and I look up to you, and fucking let's do this, right? Let's take this to the next level, whatever we can do. I want to die one day knowing I did the fucking best I can. And that's about it.
Fantastic, Bill. Well, you know what? I am so happy to have you in my life. I'm so happy that our paths crossed a year ago, because I was also not on these social platforms that we are today. And, you know, it is just amazing to have somebody like yourself in my life, because I totally look up to you, you know, and I loved those Big Book studies you had on Zoom last year. You know, you are, you're just such an inspiration. Like I know I clocked into some of your meetings on Zoom, and I was just inspired, you know, I was inspired by how well versed you were in the Big Book and carrying the message. But I also love, I love the F-bombs, you know, I mean, for me, the drop in the profanity also keeps it real. So somehow there's a combination of this incredible message, but, you know, from a real person who's just like me and gets it. So I'm so happy, Bill, to call you my friend, and that you are a part of my recovery journey. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming back on the show and catching up with me and the Soberoso podcast listeners out there. Thank you for being here today. And before I let you go, please tell anybody out there who's listening, what does UDR stand for and how they can find you online?
Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more of a plug, because I am doing the UDR cast, which stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. You know, uncovering the things within me, discovering what they are, and then recovering, moving towards correction of some of these things that have been blocking me. So that is UDR. You can find it on the UDR cast on Spotify, Apple Music, Anchor, and some other podcasting platforms. You can also find the episodes on my YouTube channel, Billwardlife. And you can find all of my platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, on my website, which is www.billward.life. And you can see everything that I'm doing. I encourage anybody to follow me and support me, as the more I can carry this message, the better off people are. Yeah, that's where I'm at, Dora.
Fantastic, Bill. Well, I love you to pieces, and thank you for joining us on the Soberoso podcast and sharing our passion for recovery.
Thank you for having me. I love you, Dora.
I love you too.
Please hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to the Soberoso Podcast and help us normalize conversations around alcoholism and addiction recovery. You can join us on Instagram and Facebook at Soberoso and follow your host, Dora Gosselin, on Clubhouse. You are not alone, and we do recover. Wear and share your passion for recovery with our His and Hers merch. Visit us at www.soberoso.com.